Hi, I'm Gareth Green and welcome to another in our little series of Inside the Mind of Bach videos, in which we're looking at a couple of phrases from a chorale each time, just trying to unpack how Bach has harmonised the melodies that he was given to work with. So you may be somebody who's wanting to improve your skills of harmonic analysis, whether it's Bach or anything else, that's fine. You may be somebody who's trying to write better harmony, in which case Bach chorales are the kind of great models that we use to encourage people to do so. Or you may be interested in the Bach style, the Bach chorale style in particular, or just thinking about Baroque style, chord function, all sorts of angles that you could take on this. So I hope this is going to be of great interest to you. So the chorale we're looking at on this occasion goes like this. So it's a chorale in a major key, and it's a chorale which doesn't modulate at all within these first two phrases. Quite often when you look at a chorale, you'll find the first phrase in one key, the second phrase in some kind of contrasting key. Quite often you look at a chorale and you find even within a phrase there's quite a bit of modulation, use of chromatic chords, all sorts of things that we need to unpack. And this one has got quite interesting melodic movement going on within the four parts, but actually it's straightforward in the sense that the first two phrases are both in A flat major. There's no key movement overall. You don't see any accidentals, so there's nothing funny going on with chromatic chords or secondary dominants or modulations within the phrase. So in a way, there's a kind of overall simplicity about this one, and that's one reason for looking at it. But at the same time, we find some classic Bach touches that turn this from something that could be a fairly plain pedestrian harmonisation into something that's rather more engaging. So let's unpack what Bach is up to. Well, first of all, he starts with an anacrusis on the last beat of the last beat of a bar, and he starts with chord 1. So that's no big surprise, I suppose. Sometimes when you have these anacrusic starts, they start on chord 5. And you could be tempted to look at that first given E flat and think, well, I could start on chord 5 there. But you can't go to chord 1 because the next note in the melody is F, and that doesn't belong to chord 1. So quite often going across that first bar line from an upbeat, you would go 5-1. So if we started on 5 here, we'll have to go 5 to 4 or 5 to 6. If we go 5 to 6, we'll get consecutive octaves between the bottom and the top, so that wouldn't be a good move. If we go 5 to 4, it would work, but 5 to 4 is often not the best move in the book. So I think for those reasons, he's probably decided it'd be better to start on chord 1. So there's chord 1. He then goes to chord 4, and 1 to 4 is a kind of strong move, isn't it? We then have an unaccented passing note in the tenor, that's C, which happens to turn the chord 4 into a 4-7. So even though it's a passing note, it strengthens that 4 by making it a 4-7. Something that Bach often does. When you look at something and you think, well, that could be one of two things. Or is it both? You know, he quite often organises things that way. So here you can say there's an unaccented passing note in the tenor, which also happens to turn the chord 4 into a 4-7. And even though in Baroque music we come across a lot of 5-7 and 2-7, Bach often uses 4-7. And here it is. Takes us on to chord 5. Then in the melody, which would have been given to him, well, that D flat looks like a passing note, but again it turns the 5 into 5-7. So again it's doing two jobs, passing and strengthening the chord, turning 5 into 5-7. Then he goes for a chord 6. You see, he could have gone for a chord 1 there, couldn't he? We could have gone back to chord 1, but he's already started on 1, so he's trying to go somewhere else. So that 5 that becomes 5-7 goes on to 6. And when you have a 5-7, it's nearly always followed by a 1 or a 6, so that the 7th chord can resolve nicely. So in this case, he's gone for a 6. I think the other reason he's gone for a 6 is also because you notice this rising bass line after the first note. See this D flat, E flat, F, G, A flat, B flat before the cadence. So this rising scale in the bass is often something he tries to put in. And it's a terrific impact it has as the bass rises. You feel a kind of increase of tension that's sometimes relaxed at the cadence. So that's what he's up to there. So the third beat of this first complete bar then is called 6. Passing note in the soprano. It's an unaccented passing note. And notice again, you can see it 2 ways. It's really coming across as a passing note. But this chord 6, when you go to the D flat, becomes a chord 4 in first inversion as well. Then we have a chord 5 in first inversion. Interestingly, with a double major third, alto and bass, something that many textbooks encourage us to avoid, because when you have a double major third, it tends to dominate the chord a bit. Bach is not averse to writing some double major thirds, but he normally does it when it's kind of protecting scale movement. Well, we've seen that scale movement in the bass. We've also got a little bit of scale movement coming the other way in the alto. So there's justification, I think, in Bach's mind for doubling a major third because of that scale movement. So we've got a 5B, a 5 in first inversion, double unaccented passing notes in the tenor and the bass. There. Again, these feel like unaccented passing notes. I think that's what they are really. When you actually look at what's going on at the end of that bar, you think, well, this is an A flat 7 chord. You know, really, all these notes are a 1-7. So really double unaccented passing notes, but just that coincidence of it making a 1-7 into the deal kind of strengthens his use of those things. Now, what have we got coming up? We've got a chord 2. So that's quite a nice move. And then quite a lot going on here as we go into the cadence. So let's see what's going on. The alto is getting us sorted out for a suspension. So from the beginning of this bar, there's a chord 2. Notice the alto, A flat, is the preparation for a 4-3 suspension. So preparation, sound, resolve, PSR. So here's the P, here's the S on beat 2, and here's the R on the second half of beat 2. So P and S, the same note, S to R going by step, normally downwards. That's what he's doing here. So the cadence itself is 5-7 to 1, just decorated by that 4-3 suspension. So we've got 2 at the beginning of the bar. We've got this preparation for the suspension in the alto. The soprano part is coming down and then back up again. So that's a kind of lower auxiliary note, isn't it? So in case you're thinking, well, what is this chord here? You could say, well, it's a 2-9 chord, a B flat 9 chord, but it's not really what's going on. It's a B flat minor chord, a chord 2, and the tenor's going from D flat to F, part of the chord. The soprano is using a lower auxiliary before going back up to the D flat. The alto is preparing for a 4-3 suspension at the same time. So really that's what's going on. Perfect cadence there, 5-7-1. The next phrase starts on a chord 5 in first inversion. That's fairly straightforward. Then going on to the third complete bar, chord 1, root position, passing note in the bass, which also happens to turn that 1 into a 7th. So it's a 1-7 in last inversion, but only because of the passing note. That's really what's going on. Unaccented passing note. 4 in first inversion, unaccented passing note in the tenor, onto a 1B. Again, 1 in first inversion interestingly with a double major third in the tenor and the bass. Not really moving scale movement in the bass, but certainly a bit of scale movement in the tenor. But you see, he's not averse to those double major thirds when it's going to improve the part writing. If he didn't double the major third there, he wouldn't have been able to do that passing note in the tenor on the previous beat. So I think he's thought, mitigating circumstances, let's have a double major third. The tenor just hopping to another harmony note. So sometimes when you want to have quaver movement between beats, you're looking for passing notes, auxiliary notes. Don't forget the possibility of just moving to another harmony note. That's what happens there. Chord 4, passing note in the soprano, unaccented, that turns the 4 into a 4/7. And then basically in the next bar, the last bar, we're going 5/1 perfect cadence. So 5, which becomes a 5/7 with that tenor D flat to 1. And again, what's going on? The alto has got another 4/3 suspension. The A flat at the end of the penultimate bar is preparing for that. And then we've got it sounding as a 4th above the bass, resolving to a 3rd above the bass. So that's the dissonance in the alto part. The soprano part, well, we talked about the D flat being part of chord 4. The C unaccented passing happens to turn 4 into 4/7 again. B flat's part of the dominant chord harmony. A flat's a lower auxiliary note back to the harmony. And in the tenor at the beginning of the last bar, we have a passing note onto the D flat, which is the note that makes it a 5/7. So that's the kind of combined stuff. Quite interesting to see how Bach sometimes has more than one thing going on at the same time. 4/3 suspension in the alto, lower auxiliary in the soprano, passing note unaccented in the tenor. All of that combines together. And it's the lovely way of enriching something that's basically fairly straightforward. What is it? A perfect cadence is going 5/1. Yet by the time Bach's finished with it, we've got all this, making it a really kind of rich finish. So how does this all come together? Here's the whole of the two phrases. So you see there's kind of beauty in simplicity there, isn't there? And how those decorative notes really make it come alive. Well, if you want to know more about Bach chorales and writing in this style, if you want to go to the Music Matters website, you'll find that we have a course on the very subject that will take you deeper, give you an opportunity to really engage with this whole topic. And if you would like to join a group in which you can meet like-minded musicians from around the world, while you're on the website, just have a click on the Maestros link on the homepage. It's a group of musicians. We meet once a month and we have live streams, and we can share information together, share music together, study together, share compositions, all sorts of exciting things go on there. And there are other perks associated with it, like discounts on our courses, various other things as well. You can read all about Maestros if that's something that interests you. But meanwhile, enjoy this chorale, really soak it up, listen to it, have a look at it, analyze it, and you'll find yourself really absorbing this wonderful Bach chorale style.